The following is a message from Christ Central Manchester, a church that meets in the heart of Manchester in the UK. To find out more about us, please visit www.christcentral.org.uk.
It's my privilege... Sorry, just excuse me a moment. My name's Keith and I'm one of the pastors here at Christ Central. If you're a visitor, just to introduce myself, and it's great to have you here with us this morning. And it's my privilege to introduce Adrian Holloway. Adrian will be known by many of you, especially those of you that go to New Day. He's a regular speaker at that event where thousands of youngsters get together every year to camp in tents for some crazy reason. And it's just a real privilege to have Adrian here. He travelled up here last night from London where he lives. And Adrian travels speaking on topics like the one we're going to be looking at this morning. We've known him for a few years. I think we've worked together on a couple of different occasions. And so it's just great to have Adrian here. He used to be a sports journalist, gave up travelling with professional footballers on planes to talk about God and talk about the kind of things that he's going to be talking about this morning. So without further ado, Adrian.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's great to be with you guys this morning. Thank you very much for having me. And I thought, just for a bit of a laugh, I thought to get underway, if it's all right with you, I'd just show you a few photos from my life. Would that be okay? This is just a bit of fun. Is that all right? Okay, first photograph then, me as a baby. And you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, that I was actually born with a receding hairline. And if you look very carefully, you can see also that I was born with a squint, which means that wherever you are seated in this room, at least one of my eyes is looking at you. Next photograph, me, age 7. Now, as you can see, thank you for that, R. As you can see, I've really got a number of problems here. But just to go through well, in fact, we went through all my problems, it would take all day. But let's just take one of my many problems here. You can see that what's happened here is that my mum has got up the old kitchen scissors and she's tried to cut my fringe straight, but she's gone ever so slightly uphill. Can you see that? Next photograph, me in a band. Oh, yes, yes, yes. When I was a student, I too was in a band. And you can see that Jim, standing on one side of me, Jim has a bit of a pout. Can you see his lips pouting? Yes, yes. That's because Jim's been in a band before. But Roddy and me, however, we haven't been in a band before, so we're just trying to look cool, you know, like you do. Next photo, me on my stag day. Just to explain, if you're not from this country, here in Britain, if you are a man and you want to get married, you first have to dress up as an ostrich jockey. And now I'm married to my wonderful wife, Julia, and we've got these 4 lovely daughters. So I'm now 48 years into my journey through life. And probably all of us would agree that during the course of a typical 70, 80, 90-year life, there usually comes a point, a moment. Now, this moment may only last for 5 minutes, but at least for those 5 minutes, you and I ask this question. Am I alive for a reason? I can see, talk, think, feel. I can have fun. But is there any purpose to life? For at least those 5 minutes, we ask, why am I here? For that matter, why is anything here? How come anything began to exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there a universe with me living in it? Why is there a planet Earth with me living on it? You know, I just showed you a few photos from my life. Well, you could take your phone right now, and you could show me a few photos from yours, but once we've added those photos together, does it mean anything? I mean, do our lives count for anything in the greater scheme of things, or are we really just meaningless bags of chemicals? Is life ultimately pointless? And during those 5 minutes, when we're thinking about this big question, along comes a 33-year-old man. Jesus of Nazareth. Now, he's by far the most famous man who's ever lived. And he looks you and me straight in the eye this morning and says, you're not an accident. You're supposed to be here. You are worth something. Jesus of Nazareth says there really is a loving, Father God. A Father God who always planned that one day you would exist. He's made you deliberately on purpose in the hope of having the most wonderful relationship with you, a relationship that's so good, it's not only good for this life, but it goes on into the next life, into a place where you'll never be bored. This is a place where every single day will be better than the one before. This is a place where we'll be filled and thrilled to the max. Jesus says you're that loved by God. And that's such a bold claim that I decided it probably was worth at least exploring. So what happened to me? Well, I didn't go to church. In fact, I didn't know anyone my age who went to church. But I was invited along, out of the blue, to a church actually a bit like this church. And I had lots of questions. One of my biggest questions was, hasn't science buried God? And this morning I'd just like to go through that journey and just look at this question in terms of the journey that I went on and the questions that I asked along the way. So this book that I'm holding is a geneticist Francis Collins' personal story of how he, halfway through his academic career, how he converted from atheism to Christianity. Halfway through his career, he became a follower of Jesus. And after becoming a Christian, Collins was appointed director of the Human Genome Project. And in April 2003, he announced to the world that he had successfully mapped the entire human genome. Now, this is one of the most astounding scientific advances of all time. Has science buried God? Well, clearly not in the opinion of the many leading scientists, like Francis Collins, who believe in God. They see no trade-off between believing in God and doing science for a living. Or how about Professor Russell Coburn, one of the leading scientists today, one of the leading physicists today at Cambridge University. He's a Bible-believing Christian, part of an evangelical church in Cambridge. Or a friend of mine, Keith Fox. Keith is professor of biochemistry at Southampton University. Next Sunday, I will be preaching in Keith Fox's church in Southampton. Or how about Professor Emma MacDonald, a leading astrophysicist, and he's based at Cardiff University, and he's actually part of a church very much like this church. He's what's called an elder or a leader at Thornhill Church in Cardiff. If you're interested, you can listen to one of our leading astrophysicists in Britain today preaching through the Bible on the downloads or on the MP3 files at Thornhill Church. There's a very long list of these top scientists who are keen Christians and who believe in God and who are doing science for a living. All of these people, they would say that juxtaposing science and God as opposites is a category mistake. Now, what do they mean when they say it's a category mistake? Well, let's imagine that I decide to make a cup of tea. And let's imagine that while the kettle is boiling, scientists Kelvin and Joule discover the precise mechanism whereby heat is turned into boiling water. So, we've discovered the mechanism. We now know how the water boiled. But it would be a mistake to say that because we've discovered the mechanism, I don't exist. It would be a mistake because you could still quite accurately say that the reason why the kettle boiled is because I wanted to make a cup of tea. To say, we discovered the mechanism, therefore Adrian Holloway does not exist. That would be a category mistake. The existence of apples does not rule out the existence of oranges. We don't need an adversarial either-or explanation. And it seems that actually most people in Britain believe in this. They agree with this. A 2005 European Commission poll found that 78% of people in the UK believe in God and or the supernatural. But these are the very same British adults who have more scientific knowledge than any preceding generation. So it seems that even in this modern technological age, most British people actually don't see science and God as enemies. They don't see it as an either-or. Most British people do see science and God as a both-and. And so, having heard this kind of reply, I then said, okay, maybe you're right. Science hasn't buried God. But hey, come on, as we discover more and more through science, hey, the Bible's version of events, it does look increasingly unlikely. Yes? Well, that is certainly not the case when it comes to the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, and the origin of organic life. And let me see if I can explain what I mean. Firstly then, regarding the origin of the universe. Up until the late 1920s, atheists used to argue that the universe was eternal. Just accept it, they said. It's always been there. There's never been a time that it wasn't there. And they used to argue in that way because at that time, the universe was thought to be locked in a static or so-called steady state. But then an American astronomer called Edwin Hubble took a series of photographs in 1929 which proved that the universe is not actually locked in a static, steady state. Hubble saw that the other galaxies are moving away from us and moving away from each other. And the easiest way for us to visualize what Hubble saw through his telescope is to use a balloon. So, just imagine with me for a moment that these stars on my 7-year-old daughter's balloon are actually galaxies. Now, what Edwin Hubble saw was that wherever we look in the universe, these galaxies are moving away from us and moving away from each other. So, cosmologists concluded that the universe is expanding. And so they concluded that if the universe is expanding in the past, it must have been much smaller than it is today. In fact, they concluded that one time the universe had a beginning. And then, in 1965, astronomers Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias discovered some background radiation in the universe that was actually left behind by this beginning moment. So today there is an overwhelming scientific consensus that at one time the universe did have a beginning. Now this was a huge blow to atheists because they could no longer argue that the universe had always been there. This is a good example of how a scientific discovery has made it easier to believe in God, because this beginning moment does look like Genesis chapter 1 verse 3, where God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. Let me put it to you another way. Imagine if I said to you, 13.7 billion years ago, there was absolutely nothing. And then, 1 second later, there was a huge purple carrot the size of Manchester. Now, the sudden appearance of the huge carrot would demand some sort of explanation. You see, it's not that matter and energy exploded into an already existing space-time universe. No. Space and time themselves began to exist at this beginning moment. Space, time, matter, and energy all began to exist at the same point. We now know that the universe came into existence suddenly out of nothing. And so this discovery supports the second step of a simple case for the existence of God. If you could just go back to that slide. Thank you very much. Step 1 says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now, this sounds reasonable. At least we don't know of any exceptions to step 1. Step 2 says that the universe began to exist. And as we've just seen, this is the reigning scientific orthodoxy today. This is the standard model. The conclusion necessarily follows that the universe has a cause. Something, or someone, that exists outside of time and space caused the space-time universe to come into being. Let me finish this first point with a funny story from my life. When my wife, Julia, went into labour with our fourth child, it was all happening really fast. So she goes into labour, and for the first time ever, we actually called an ambulance to our house. And so we're now racing in the back of the ambulance to the hospital. And in the back of the ambulance, it occurs to me that we don't have another girl's name, if this is going to be another girl, because by this stage we've used up all our girls' names on our first three daughters. And so, looking for a name, looking for a bit of last-minute inspiration, you may be amused to know that I asked the ambulance lady, by the way, what's your name? And she said, Tanith. I said, pardon? She said, Tanith. I said, how do you spell that? She said, Tanith. She said, do you know what it means? I said, no. She said, it means the serpent lady. So, we called our baby girl Emma. But hey, at no time during the birth did any of the medical staff think that Emma had come into existence for absolutely no reason at all. Why? Because everyone in the world bases their life on the law of cause and effect. So to get a universe out of nothing, you need a cause. And a cause that's capable of bringing space, time, matter, and energy into existence, well, you could call that first cause God. So I looked at the origin of the universe. Next, the fine-tuning of the universe. Now, we know that if we were just 5% closer to the sun, we'd fry. We know that if we were 5% further away, we would freeze. There wouldn't be any life on Earth. And our solar system just happens to be in what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone of our Milky Way, in between the Sagittarius and Perseus spiral arms. Maybe you can see the tiny yellow letters which show where our sun is. It turns out this is a rare, safe place in the Milky Way, also, of course, where you are. But the degree of fine-tuning that we are talking about when we're talking about the origin of the universe is far more impressive than any of this. Because way back, at the beginning of the universe, there is an explosion which causes matter to fly outwards, but it flies outwards at a perfectly controlled speed. Too fast an expansion, and nothing would ever have existed. There wouldn't be a universe. Alternatively, too slow an expansion, and the universe would just have collapsed back on itself. So the universe expands, but the speed of expansion turns out to be critical. If slowed down too much, the universe will never get going in the first place. If the rate of expansion 1 second after the beginning moment had been smaller by even 1 part in 100 million billion, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size. And the speed of this crucial expansion is controlled by something called the cosmological constant. And that is the energy density of empty space. Therefore, the cosmological constant cannot be just any old number. No, don't panic. In order for life to exist, the value of the cosmological constant has to be fine-tuned to a very precise number. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And it is not just the cosmological constant, which is actually 4 up from the bottom of this table. Turns out there are 20 of these forces, 20 numbers, 20 values that have to be just so Otherwise, no humans, no people, could ever have existed. Even the tiniest variation here or there would make all the difference. And maybe I can illustrate this concept by just telling you a funny story. And folks, for this illustration to work, I will have to ask you all to do me a brief favour. For this to work, could you all please, just for a moment, if you don't mind, could you all just look at my face? Not a pleasant sight, I know, but just look at my face. And now, as you're looking at my face, I'd like to ask for a show of hands. As you're looking at my face, ladies and gentlemen, could you please raise your hand if you think, looking at my face, that I have got a criminal record? Just raise your hand. One hand straight up, straight away here. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, a handful of people. Okay, now could you, hands down, thank you. Could you please raise your hand if looking at my face you think that I have not got a criminal record? Okay, that's probably the majority. Well, the truth is, folks, that I have got a criminal record. The truth is, yeah, shocking, I know. The truth is that on the 14th of November, 1988, I was arrested for alarm, distress, and willful obstruction of a highway. Yeah, see that you're interested. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to tell you about my crime. In fact, in a moment, I will tell you about my crime. But what was really quite exhilarating was the way, the manner in which I was arrested. Because I was arrested, being chased by a police car with blaring sirens, flashing lights. I was on foot, the coppers are in the car, they're chasing me. I've run across 2 roads, I've jumped over this fence, I'm now running uphill through a muddy field. The police car screeches to a halt, the 2 coppers fly out the car, they jump over the fence, I'm running uphill as fast as I can. I'm in a police chase. So they're getting closer and closer, I'm running as fast as I can, they're getting closer and closer. Then eventually I can hear the quicker of these 2 coppers, he's getting closer and closer and closer. And then eventually he does this excellent rugby tackle on me from behind, and I go, bang, face down in the mud. And I'm lying there, face down in the mud, thinking to myself, that was cool. I mean, they must practice that, don't you think? 1 minute, I'm in full flight, next, bang, face down in the mud. And so I'm lying there in the mud. And, you know, I haven't been arrested ever before, so I'm just rifling through cop TV shows in my mind that I've watched for years growing up. And, of course, as you know, on TV, when you get arrested, the first thing the policeman says is, "You're Nick, Sonny Jim." Do you know, he actually said that. I couldn't believe it. You're Nick. So he actually said that. So I stood up, I said, look, officer, I really just want to say a massive thank you. I mean, it's really quite exciting. I'm actually from Wimbledon, so I mean, there's, you know, the chase, the flashing lights, the sirens, you know, the running across the field, the rugby tackle, it's all quite exhilarating. And so then he says, well, as you know, on cop TV shows, next thing that happens at this point is that one of the policemen puts your arm up your back like this, and he did that as well. So now I'm walking over towards the squad car like this, and as I'm getting towards the car itself, as you know on TV, what happens at this point is that when the arrested person is put into the back of the car, one of the policemen puts their hand on your head and pushes you down as if you've never got into the back seat of a car ever before. And he did that as well. So I'm now in the back of the car, I go down the station, and I empty out my pockets, and so I'm put in the cells. Now, I don't know, it might be that by this stage there's 1 or 2 people here, and by this stage you're curious to know, hey, what was the alarm? What was the distress? What was the willful obstruction of a highway? Well, I have to confess that I was a student at the time. And what had happened was that I come home to the college where I was living, and as I was just entering the college, I noticed that there was a group of 20 of my friends, and they had got hold of quite a large felled tree that they were moving to block a road that led to a rival, and in our opinion, inferior college. And so I joined in naturally because at that time I thought that actually I was doing a public service by blocking access to this institution. I thought this institution was of no public benefit to anyone anyway, so I thought it was a good idea to block it off permanently. But then what happened, of course, was that flashing blue lights appear in the distance, all my mates scarper. And I remember thinking, no, you don't need to run away. We're students. This is obviously a student prank. The police are reasonable people. I'm from Wimbledon. I'll be able to reason with these people. But when the police car got really close, I thought, no, probably this is wrong. Probably this will turn out to be alarm, distress, and a willful obstruction of a highway. And so because I was the last to leave the scene of my crime, I was also the easiest to catch. 5 seconds was the difference between me running away with all my mates and not being arrested versus me staying and getting arrested. That's the difference, 5 seconds. But folks, we are talking about now the difference between our universe existing and nothing existing. The difference between those two things coming down to a far smaller, far tinier variable than 5 seconds. Roger Penrose, who helped develop our current understanding of black holes, he worked out the odds, the chances of entropy. Entropy being the speed at which things break down and decay in our universe. The chance that entropy would have exactly the value that it does have, here's the chance: 1 chance in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. That, folks, is a number that has more zeros on the end of it than the total number of particles in the entire universe. But entropy is just one of the 20 factors. All 20 have to be just so in order for us to be here. So, question, why is our universe so unlikely? Answer, because of the number of competing forces that have to be perfectly balanced in the earliest seconds of the universe's existence. So, it turns out that gravity and electromagnetism have to just, bing, exist. But not just exist. They have to then be finely tuned to each other. The same is true of matter and antimatter, the strong and the weak nuclear force, neutrons and electrons. All of these things have to be just so. Any messing with any of these numbers in the column that says value in our universe, and we wouldn't be here. There'd be no universe, no life. Let's take gravity, for example. Now, let's just imagine for a moment that this tape measure was so enormously long that it stretched from one side of the universe over here right over to the other side of the universe over here. Yeah? If it did, it would genuinely represent the total possible range of force strengths that gravity could have had. So over at this side, we would have the weakest possible gravitational force that gravity could have had. And over this side, we would have the strongest possible gravitational force that gravity could have had. Yeah? And let's just say that gravity is currently set here, where my finger is. Now, let's imagine that I wake up one morning and I decide I would like to increase the strength of gravity. And so I increase the strength of gravity by just 2.5 centimeters from here to here. Folks, that tiny increase on this vast scale would have increased the strength of gravity on Earth 1 billion-fold. It would mean that there would never have been any life on Earth. This tiny increase from here to here would have meant that planet Earth would have had a maximum diameter of just 12 meters. This tiny increase from here to here would have meant that planet Earth would never have been any bigger than this room. But that's just gravity. All of the numbers on the table we're looking at have to be perfectly related to each other. Scientists have discovered that 2 of these on our list are fine-tuned to each other to a precision of 1 in 10 to the power 40. Now, you and I are wondering, well, how can I visualize what's a 1 in 10 to the power 40 chance? What would that look like? Well, thankfully, a Canadian astronomer called Hugh Ross of Toronto University, he has a famous illustration of the 1 in 10 to the power 40 chance. And here's what he says. Hugh Ross says, take a continent the size of North America, he says, and cover it with small coins. He says, pile your coins up so high that your coins reach 236,000 miles, in other words, the distance from the Earth to the moon. Okay? He says, then take another additional 1 billion other continents, also the size of North America, and again cover them with small coins, and again pile your coins up 236,000 miles up into the sky. He says, then, after you've done that, take an additional 1 coin, but this time, paint your 1 coin red. And then hide your one red coin somewhere in one of your 1 billion piles the size of North America that reached the moon. He says, once you've done that, find a member of the public and ask them whether they would like to participate in a scientific experiment. If they say yes, you blindfold the member of the public, and then you say to them, pick a coin, any coin. Folks, the chance that this person will pick out the one red coin from the 1 billion piles the size of North America that reached to the moon, that chance is a 1 in 10 to the power 40 chance. That's what we need for just 2 of our list to be fine-tuned. In order for us to be here to talk about it, we have to have all 20 fine-tuned to each other. Folks, I reached a point where I realized that in any other area of my life, I would never accept chance or sheer luck as the best explanation of the facts that are in front of us. Our third and final point this morning is all to do with the origin of organic life. And I wonder if I could just begin this third point just by telling you about a funny thing that happened to me watching the World Cup on TV. Now, I realise that what I'm about to say next will be hard. Frankly, it will be hard for some of you here this morning to imagine. But I'd like you to know that when I was growing up here in England, every 4 years, when the Football World Cup came round, everyone in England genuinely thought that England would win the World Cup. Hard to imagine now, I know. And of course, you know, we didn't win the World Cup, as you can imagine. We were knocked out every year on penalties. But I can tell you that in the summer of 1990, during the Italia 90 World Cup, England got to the quarter-final. And in the quarter-final, we played Belgium. And so that night, we all packed into the bar, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the match on the big screen. And I can tell you that when in the final minute, when David Platt swiveled to volley the ball into the net for the winning goal, at that moment, as the ball crossed the line for the winning goal, as the ball hit the back of the net, at that moment, I kissed people who I'd never met. In fact, even if you were Belgian, I would have kissed you. There is something about life that is exciting. There's something about life that's amazing. And if each of us were to look at our unique DNA sequence right now, we would be blown away by the complexity of the information carried in each and every one of our cells. And so we're going to look at a video now, if you want to press play, and with the benefit of computer animation, we can actually have a look inside a cell and see this remarkable system at work. Okay, so we're going to enter into the heart of a cell for just a couple of minutes and have a look at something which, of course, is happening right inside your body right now, cell multiplication. After entering the inside or the heart of a cell, we can see here the tightly wound strands of DNA. These are storehouses that contain the instructions that are needed in order to build every single protein in an organism. And next, in a process that's known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions that are needed in order to assemble a specific protein molecule. Then, another molecular machine copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. And when transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex. Can you see it knocking on the door? It's all very British. Ask permission. I mean, it's amazing to think the miniature scale that all of this is happening. So this is the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is then directed to a two-part molecular factory, and this factory is called a ribosome, where, after attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids arriving on the bottom of the screen, these are being transported from other parts of the cell and they're linked into chains that are often hundreds of units long. It's their sequential arrangement that determines the type of protein that's being manufactured. And of course, all of this is being determined by your unique genetic DNA code, the code that was embedded in that double helical structure that we saw way back at the start of our video. Anyway, when this chain is finished, it's moved from the ribosome to this barrel-shaped machine where it is going to be folded into the precise chain shape critical to its function. And even here, it turns out that the three-dimensional peptide bonds are crucial to the folding process. And it's mind-boggling to think that what you're watching on the screen is happening at such a minute level in your body, even as you're watching the animation of the same thing happening on the screen. Anyway, after this chain is folded into a protein, it's released and shepherded by, whoa, another molecular machine where it's taken to the exact location where it's needed. Now that's what happens in a cell today. But even the most primitive, even the most basic cell that scientists have ever been able to envisage, the first ever living cell, even that cell still contains information in a code. So the code and the means of translating the code are both needed from the word go. One of those things is useless without the other. So the question is, where did the information come from in the first ever living cell? Well, Sir Francis Crick is the man who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA, the genetic code of life. He has said there's literally zero probability of life coming into existence on Earth by chance. It's been said by some that Francis Crick understands the complexity of life starting on Earth better than anyone else. Francis Crick knows that DNA can't just happen, but he was an atheist. So the question is, how did DNA get here? He answered that DNA arrived on our planet billions of years ago in a spaceship sent to Earth by aliens. Sir Francis Crick said, seeing as life could never have come into existence on our planet by chance, it must have been transported here by intelligent life from elsewhere in the galaxy by spaceship. So he says in his book, Life Itself, quote, microorganisms traveled in the head of an unmanned spaceship sent to Earth by a higher civilization, which developed elsewhere billions of years ago. Now, I suggest that he hasn't solved the problem. I suggest that he simply moved the problem. With each passing decade, the problem of getting life out of non-life increases. Naturalistic models of getting life from non-life depend upon the early Earth having a so-called reducing atmosphere. But then atmospheric physicists discovered in the 1980s that the atmosphere on the early Earth was the exact opposite of the required reducing atmosphere. The idea at that time was that life emerged on our planet by chance from a prebiotic soup of chemicals on the Earth's surface. But then in the 1990s, studies showed that the early Earth never had a prebiotic soup. Anyway, we are out of time, folks. So let's try and draw some of these different threads together. Now, nothing that I've said this morning proves that God exists. In fact, I'll repeat that so that we are all clear. Nothing that I've said this morning proves that God exists. But if you were to look for the inference to the best explanation, then when you look at the origin of the universe, and when you look at the fine-tuning of the universe, and when you look at the origin of biological information, in all three cases, what seems to be needed is a transcendent, intelligent first cause. And you could call a transcendent, intelligent first cause God. So it's clear that science hasn't buried God. God's existence is a reasonable explanation for the existence of the universe and for the existence of life. Okay, finally, what about Charles Darwin's famous theory of evolution? Well, evolution, by which we're talking about evolution on a big scale. Evolution on a small scale is something that I think every single human being on this planet agrees that evolution on a small scale has taken place. Evolution on a big scale, evolution begins with the entire universe already in existence. Evolution has nothing to say about how the universe started. Evolution has nothing to say about how life began. So let's just be clear about how limited the scope of evolutionary theory really is. Biological evolution does not even begin until the universe has already been in existence for 10 billion years. How did the universe get here? Why did it begin to exist? Well, evolution doesn't even address those questions. Evolution begins after you've already got our universe, and you've already got planet Earth, and you've already got a single-celled organism living on the surface of our planet in the ideal conditions. So I think it's obvious that evolution could be true and God still exists, yes? It would be a mistake to argue because evolution has happened, God does not exist. That is the mistake that Richard Dawkins makes. That is the category mistake that we started with. And so I just want to finish by looking really briefly for 2 minutes at 3 different Christian responses to evolution. And as I do, maybe the band would like to come and join me on the stage. The first response is often called young Earth creationism. Now, this is the view that the Earth is young. It's only about 20 to 30,000 years old. It was created in 6 24-hour days. This view says that common descent or evolution between species has not happened. If you want to find out more about this view, you could go to Answers in Genesis. Second view is often called old Earth creationism. So this view accepts the scientific consensus today that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. But this view also says, along with the first view, that evolution between species or common descent has not taken place. If you'd like to find out more about that view, you could go to Reasons to Believe or reasons.org. A third view is sometimes called theistic evolution. And this view differs from the first 2 views because it says that common descent or evolution between species has taken place. And they'd argue that God has supervised this process to a greater or a lesser extent. And here you could look at biologos. Now, all 3 of these views are taken by sincere Christians who want to take the Bible seriously. Obviously, they do interpret the early chapters of the book of Genesis differently. And certainly in our church, you will find all 3 of these views represented, and in fact, a number of others as well. Okay, so you might be asking, look, what's the bottom line here? You may be asking, Adrian, I don't normally go to church. Hey, I was brought up to believe in evolution. My parents believe in evolution. At school, I was taught evolution. Everything that I see on television assumes evolution. Can I follow Jesus Christ? Answer, yes. If you take the view that macroevolution has taken place, the big question is, why would there be a planet capable of supporting advanced organic life? Why would there be exactly the right mineral deposits? Why would there be exactly the right amount of arsenic? Why would the stars have a burning cycle that produces just the right number of heavy elements to support the evolution of advanced organic life? So I don't have to commit intellectual suicide? No. Hey, I was brought up like you. I was brought up to believe in evolution. My parents believe in evolution. At school, I was taught evolution and so on. But I've come to trust Jesus Christ, and I found that actually I didn't have to throw my brain out the window to do so. Lastly, we might wonder if God has gone to all this trouble to create the universe out of nothing, and then to fine-tune the universe so that it can support life. If God's gone to all this trouble to create these creatures, then surely God might want to communicate and reach out to these people who he's gone to all the trouble of creating. Hey folks, all the Bible is claiming is that is what's happening through Jesus of Nazareth. And for me, finding that there really is a loving God and getting to know him personally through trusting Jesus Christ, folks, that has been the most thrilling discovery of my life. It's been great being with you. God bless you. I'll see you again next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Just to say that this talk will be on our website quite soon this week, hopefully. And if you go on our website and search through the videos and the audio for previous sermons, if you go down to the bottom, you can search for big questions. And this has been the fourth part of, over the last 12 months, going through big questions as a church. Every so often we've come back to this kind of mini-series. And we've looked at what does God think about sex, what does God think about the refugee crisis, and we also looked at what about suffering. Can God exist if there's suffering in the world? And obviously this has been another massive question that we've looked at this morning. So grateful for Adrian coming up from London and being with us this weekend and sharing on this topic. We're going to